Welcome to Gender Decoded. I'm really glad you're here. Whether you're on a walk, driving, or just lying in bed, thank you for tuning in. This is a space where we unpack the big shifts in our culture and our psychology, especially through the lens of gender. And today, we've got something that will seriously challenge how you think about mental health in teens. It's not just about girls versus boys anymore. It's about ideology. And the new lines we're seeing are kind of shocking. So in today's episode, we're diving deep into over 4 decades of survey data tracking American teens and how their
This is just so
psychological
unfair.
well-being has changed. We're going to look at what the data says, how it was collected, and most importantly, what it reveals. And let me just say, this is not your typical girls cry more, boys act out story. We're seeing something way more complex, and it has a lot to do with smartphones, identity, and politics.
Welcome to Gender Decoded, where numbers align, seeing the stories that data defines. Breaking the barriers, truth untold, insights in gender, the data force.
Let's set the stage. Since the early 1980s, a massive national study called Monitoring the Future has asked 12th graders across the United States how they feel about themselves, their life satisfaction, their sense of meaning, and their loneliness. Every single year, the same kinds of questions. Do you feel like your life is meaningful? Do you like who you are? Do you feel alone? These aren't casual questions, they go right to the heart of how teens are really doing. And because it's been going on so long, we can see clear trends across time, how things have changed since the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and right up to 2022. Now, here's what the researchers did with that data. They created a composite score called a psychological distress index that puts together 16 different items related to self-esteem, life satisfaction, loneliness, and self-derogation. The idea is, the higher your score, the more distress you're experiencing. They use something called the dyad ratios algorithm to harmonize the trends and then smooth out the year-to-year bumps so we can really see the long-term movement. And then they broke the data down 2 ways, by sex, so male versus female, and by ideology, liberal versus conservative. That's where things get really interesting. First, let's talk gender. From the early 80s until around 2010, the gap between girls and boys was real but not enormous. Girls scored a little higher on distress than boys, about 5 points higher, to be precise. But around 2011, that gap explodes. Girls' distress levels shoot up. In fact, by 2022, the average score for 12th grade girls had doubled. Boys went up too, but way less. And now, the gap between girls and boys is about 12 points. That's huge. It tells us something really shifted in the last decade. But then, here's the twist. When you overlay political ideology, you see something even more dramatic. Liberal teens, especially liberal girls, are reporting psychological distress levels far beyond any other group. In 2022, liberal girls scored around 47 on this distress index. That's more than double where they were just a decade earlier. Liberal boys aren't doing great either. They've climbed into the mid-30s. Meanwhile, conservative boys are hovering around 20. That's the lowest of all. So now the biggest divide is not gender, it's ideology. And it's not subtle. The difference between liberals and conservatives is more than 25 points on the scale. That means political identity is now the strongest predictor of distress, more than whether you're male or female. That's honestly mind-blowing. Think about this. A liberal boy now reports worse mental health than a conservative girl. That completely flips the script on how we usually think about gender and emotion. So why is this happening? Let's talk about some possibilities. First, the timeline really matters. That 2011 turning point? That's the year smartphone use exploded among teens. Suddenly, the way kids connected,
I don't know
compared
which
themselves,
filter
and
makes me look
processed their
socially
identity
conscious,
moved
but
online 24/7.
effortless.
Girls in particular are more affected by appearance-based social media and peer dynamics rooted in emotional closeness. So the pressure to curate a perfect life and the constant fear of exclusion hit them hard. Now, layer ideology on top. Liberal teens are more likely to follow news about climate change, systemic injustice, political instability, all real issues, but also overwhelming when you're 17 and trying to figure out who you are. If your worldview is built on seeing and caring about systemic problems, you might feel more despair, more helplessness, more urgency. Add in pandemic, isolation, school closures, and non-stop doom scrolling. It's a storm. Meanwhile, conservative teens often report stronger community ties like churches or close-knit families that act as buffers. They also tend to consume less politically charged content online. That doesn't mean they're not struggling in their own ways, but they're protected from some of the ambient dread that liberal teens seem to absorb. So to recap, we looked at 42 years of survey data showing adolescent well-being. We saw that while girls have always reported slightly more distress than boys, that gap exploded after 2011, and it's doubled since. But when we include political ideology, we find an even more powerful force at play. Liberal teens, especially girls, are in serious crisis. The combination of social media, identity politics, exposure to global injustice, and pandemic isolation created a perfect storm of anxiety, loneliness, and despair. And this isn't just an academic observation. If we want to help this generation heal, we need to go beyond school counselors and mindfulness apps. We need to rethink the digital environments we've allowed to shape them, and how our political and cultural narratives are affecting their sense of hope. This is about structural change. It's about what stories we feed our youth and what tools we give them to navigate them. That's it for today's episode of Gender Decoded. Thank you for being here. If this conversation made you think or feel something, consider sharing it with someone else. Because these patterns are real, and they're affecting the people we love. I'll be back soon with another deep dive into the gendered patterns shaping our world. Until then, take care of yourself and each other.